Good morning, eminent panel. It's a privilege to be part of this. I believe this is going to be a great learning experience for me. I would primarily like to share some of the things which we did in Kerala startup ecosystem and probably the type of mistakes we did, and learn from all of us how actually when we go further, especially in the whole of the nation, how do we actually move further on this. So some of you may be aware that Kerala was one of the pioneering states in the startup movement, and perhaps the reason which Ms. Sharma has mentioned is very relevant for Kerala also, because as a state we are never known for industrial growth, we are never known for large industrial hubs, but primarily known for social and other development. So we don't have a industry which is driving the startup ecosystem. So the academia was the first choice for that. So way back in 2012, Kerala came out with a policy for supporting startups and entrepreneurship within colleges, within polytechnics and engineering colleges. And this primarily was by establishing entrepreneurship development clubs, IEDCs, providing grants, providing infrastructure, providing other setting up small PBIs and things like that. And the results was good. We have large number of startups have come from the startup ecosystem, college, academia startup ecosystem. Around 80% of Kerala startups was coming from academic ecosystem per se. But in 2017, we actually took a review of that. We actually started looking at whether this is really translated into something really specific. After 5 years of 2012 policy, and then 2014 there was another state startup policy itself. And we found that, and the results were relieving. We found that while the students were very enthusiastic on developing several products while in the college, with the support of faculty, and many times even without that, the success of them to continue further was very low. We had maybe around 1 in 10 or maybe 1 in 20 actually going into the next stage. So there is a high dropout rate after the completion of the college, and they end up over there. And there were IPs getting created, but then sweating of IP was a big challenge. That was not happening, primarily because many of these IPs were at the level of, maybe if you look at the technology readiness level, it may be at the level of 3 or 4. But if you look at when you really want to translate it, it has to be at a much higher level of TR. So in 2017, we actually started looking at this in much more detail and identify what would be the causes of this. And we found that the failure of the startups, when the student startups going into the next stage, is happening at 2 levels. One is there is an early failure, and primarily this is a case with many of the startups, even otherwise, is where there is a strong market product fit is missing. The second thing is there is a challenge of scaling up. So we went into the more detail into each of these reasons, and we found that there are 3 early factors. There are multiple, but for want of time, I will limit it to 3 key factors. We found that the 3 key factors, and I'll little bit expand on each of this. There are 3 things. One is idea. Many times the students work on ideas which they get excited, but not necessarily what market is getting excited about. The second is what the madam has rightly pointed out, the capacity or the knowledge to deliver a product into the market at a level which it compete with the best in the world, because market is not necessarily be very sympathetic to whether a product is coming from a student, startup or others. The third thing is the involvement of academic institutions. There are few faculty members and champions, but the involvement of academic ecosystem in it is actually not to the extent which it would have been. So these 3 things are what we found as the early failure factors. And I know that many of the institutions from IIC, IIT, Madras, IIT Hyderabad, etc., this is much more. So we need to learn from how that has actually happened in those institutions. And in the scale-up challenges, which are more systemic, which may not be discussed at this stage, but we found that the challenge was that there is a lack of an investment ecosystem which requires you to go into the next stage, because you require a large level of investment there. You also have a case, at least in Kerala, where after a student startup sort of mature, it migrate into a bigger hub, maybe to Hyderabad or to Bangalore, because of the ecosystem which is available there. And I think it's a global phenomenon, right? The Canadian startups moves to Valley, or the startup from Ahmedabad may move to Bangalore and or Hyderabad or Bombay or NCR region. So this is a challenge which I think we need to be cognizant about. And third is about lack of accelerators, which takes them into the real level. And there is also an opportunity cost for the students. See, when a student is actually doing something innovative and good at the college level and coming out with something good at that stage, they are actually become the darlings of the recruiters. So the chance of them getting into a job is very, very fast compared to a person who has not done anything. So there is a challenge of the student whether I should continue with the startup or should I move to a job person. So these things made us found that this is actually a challenge that we can actually create this culture of innovation, but to sustain that and to make the economic development of a state is a challenge as such. So what we have looked at it at each of these, and we found, as I said, the first challenge was the idea challenge, and the idea challenge we went and we discussed that many times the students are not really exposed to the real challenges which the industry and the society faces. And that is basically where made an intervention called demand days, where various government, it started with government, later it moved to other private sector. Various government departments were asked to bring their challenges as which are live problems and then pose it to the students. And then if a student innovation started and if it is at least it reaches a early prototype level, then the government will create an innovation zone within the government department where the student and the experts from the government will actually work together. We have some very interesting success stories in utility space, in police, and few of those areas as well. So demand days was one of the key things which we did. We also did a reboot Kerala hackathon after the two ravaged floods in Kerala. We need a substantial amount of changes where we involved students through this reboot Kerala hackathon. And from Kerala Startup Mission, we also did something called a fail fast succeed. We know that a startup fail in an early stage. So we created an accelerated program where we know to see whether their product has got a market fit or not. Now, these are all been launched after 2017. But one good thing is that the failure rate from an MVP to commercialization has drastically reduced. While it was almost around 90% earlier, now it has reduced almost to 30%. But I still have to, we will still have to actually go into the next stage in a bigger way. The second thing which we found is a challenge is the knowledge. They may not have the adequate knowledge to look at, basically they may be looking at the MOOC courses or the various other resources, but you actually require good software support, good hardware support, etc. That's basically where the fab labs, the future labs, where the newer technology labs, etc., has become as a common infrastructure, where this actually helped. Plus the business leadership, which is also an important element because business knowledge was a challenge. So that is an element which has helped them to move into more of a level of a sustainability person. The third level is primarily about the involvement of academics. I believe that is the biggest challenge, and I'll not take much time because I think my time is almost over. And we found that there is a paradox in our institutions that faculty do research, they come out with papers, but many times this is not necessarily translated into the startup ecosystem as such. So there was, and when we went into the detail, we found that there is no incubation support for the technologies which are at an early stage to get into the marketable technology, except in some of the national institutions and others. So that is basically where the Kerala now try to create a scheme so that the innovations from the students and innovation from the faculty, which both of them will get incubated. So there may be, it's not necessarily that the incubator and the entrepreneur need to be the same. So there is a sort of a technology transfer and a technology incubation and transfer model is happening. And we have created a statewide platform called Research Innovation Network Kerala, where the research from the various faculty members and academic institutions are actually being put into that. And a support system has been created to ensure that those technologies are at a level where it can actually be translated into the market person. So all these primarily have positive results so far. Our failure rates have substantially reduced. Obviously, the percentage of students startup in the ecosystem also reduced. That's primarily because the ecosystem has grown. Today, we have around 4,100 startups, of which around 1,500 has come from the college student startups. And our students failure rate, that is students going developing and not going further has actually reduced from almost 92% to close to around 32% as on today. So there's a substantive change in that which has happened. But I believe that we'll have to go further. And I know that many of the institutions, the experts who are representing here have got ecosystems which has created very impactful startups. And we need to learn how some of them have happened in that space. So thank you very much for this opportunity, and I look forward to a very vibrant discussion. Thank you.